Okay, let's talk about the one number you're supposed to be able to trust, no matter what. The number that's a nation's lifeline. But what happens when you call and nobody answers? Today we're diving into Australia's emergency call crisis, and it all kicks off with one single, chilling digit.
9. Just look at that number for a second. It seems so small, right? Almost insignificant. But when we're talking about a national emergency network, 9 represents an absolute catastrophic failure, because these 9 weren't just missed calls.
They were 9 failed emergency calls during one company's network outage, and they've been reportedly linked to the deaths of at least 3 people. That is the human cost when this critical infrastructure breaks down, and that's exactly why we need to talk about this.
See, this isn't just a story about a phone company having a really, really bad day. This is about this system that's literally designed to save our lives, Australia's triple-O network, and what happens when it just goes dark.
So for anyone watching who isn't familiar, 000 is Australia's version of 911 or 999. It's the one number you're taught from childhood to call for the police, for the fire department, or for an ambulance. It's supposed to be the most dependable phone number in the entire country, period.
And here's the thing that's so crucial to understand. This wasn't some freak act of nature. It wasn't some massive, unforeseeable catastrophe. The company, Optus, came right out and admitted it was a simple procedural error. Someone on staff didn't follow the rules during a firewall upgrade. And get this, it was the second time it had happened in just 2 weeks.
To really get a sense of the scale here, you have to know this number, 8,500. That's about how many calls the triple-O network gets every single day. So any disruption, even for just a few minutes, puts thousands of people at risk. It really shows you just how fragile that lifeline can be.
Now this is where it gets really interesting and honestly, pretty concerning. When you zoom out a little, you start to see that this wasn't some random, isolated incident. For Australia's second biggest telco, this is just the latest chapter in a much larger and very troubling pattern of problems.
I mean, just look at this track record. First, you've got a massive data breach, spilling sensitive customer info everywhere. Then, boom, the huge 2023 outage that basically brought the country to a standstill. Then, they're hit with a colossal $100 million fine for what was called appalling sales conduct. And now we're seeing repeated failures of the emergency call network. You put it all together, and it really starts to look less like bad luck and more like a systemic issue.
And hey, remember that massive outage from 2023? The official reason was a router malfunction during an upgrade. But here's the kicker. It happened at an exchange in North America, owned by its parent company, Singtel, which is based in Singapore. So a mistake made thousands of kilometers away can completely sever a critical piece of Australia's infrastructure. It's a huge vulnerability.
So, with a crisis this bad, you know what happens next, right? The blame game. The finger-pointing started almost immediately. On one side, you've got absolute political fury. On the other, you've got a corporation scrambling to do damage control. Let's break down who's blaming who.
The political reaction was, well, swift and sharp. The opposition leader, Susan Ley, did not mince words. She called it the third in a series of catastrophic failures and demanded a full independent inquiry into the whole system.
And this slide, it just lays out the standoff perfectly. On the political side, you have accusations that the government minister is missing in action and urgent calls for an inquiry to try and restore public trust. And the corporate response? Well, they blame their own tech staff, the CEO says he's not resigning, and the parent company, Singtel, has to fly in for emergency meetings. It's a classic corporate political showdown.
But why does one company's failure cause this much chaos? This chart tells you everything you need to know. Optus isn't just some small player. They control over a third of the entire Australian market. We're talking 10 million customers. So when they go down, a massive chunk of the country goes dark with them.
Now here's the context that makes the public's frustration so understandable. Even with this huge market dominance, Australia's internet performance is, let's be honest, pretty mediocre. They're ranked 32nd in the world for mobile speed and a pretty dismal 60th for broadband. People in countries all over the world have faster, more reliable internet.
And then you see this number, $8.2 billion. That's Optus's annual revenue. It's a staggering amount of money. And when you see that, it makes these repeated, dangerous failures of service and safety even harder for people to swallow.
So that brings us to the most important question, right? What happens now?
How do you possibly fix a system this broken and rebuild trust in something as fundamental as an emergency phone line? Well, a few different paths are starting to emerge.
Okay, so you've basically got 4 things happening at once. First, the official government body, ACMA, is launching its own investigation. Second, the political pressure for a faster, independent review is not letting up. Third, the government is scrambling to create a new custodian, basically a watchdog for the network. And then there's the fourth, most radical idea of all, taking the service out of private hands and just nationalizing the whole thing.
And that idea, it really gets to the absolute core of this whole debate. Do you stick with private control, where the primary focus is always going to be profit and keeping shareholders happy, or do you switch to a nationalized service, where the one and only focus is public safety with direct government oversight? That is the fundamental choice that Australia is facing right now.
You know, in the end, it might all just boil down to this one really powerful idea. When your business can literally stand in the way of life-saving services, sorry just doesn't cut it anymore. You have to be better. This statement just perfectly captures how the public feels. Stop apologizing and start fixing it.
Which leaves all of us with this final, really tough question. This is bigger than one company or one outage. It's about a fundamental issue of trust, safety, and national security. Can a private, foreign-owned company whose main driver is profit truly be trusted to keep a nation's most sacred promise that when you call for help, someone will always, always answer?